Hello, and welcome to Interabang Chats. Today I'm really thrilled to have with us Tiffany McDaniel, whose new book, Betty, will be published on Tuesday, August 18th. Tiffany, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you with us again at Interabang Books. Some of our book club members may remember that you joined us to discuss your debut novel, The Summer That Melted Everything, and I think that was 2017. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and it was so great because I heard from readers after that. They reached out to me through my website and stuff, and it was so great. And I've stayed in touch with them since. So it was a wonderful experience and something that kind of introduced me to uh, lots of new friends. I look at them, so it was really great.
That's awesome. Well, and we're looking forward to having you back again to talk about the new book, Betty, for our October book club meeting on Zoom. So that'll be exciting. That's scheduled for October 7th at 6 o'clock. So we're looking forward to that. And I've already told our book club members about the fact that you'll be joining us again. Many of them are the same and they're very excited, but the new ones are excited too, just because the ones that were with us in 2017 were so enthusiastic about it.
Oh gosh, I'm thrilled. Yeah, it'll be so great to kind of revisit and hear those familiar voices. And this time we have Zoom and stuff, so we'll get to see put faces to names. So it'll be really wonderful.
Well, both of your books, The Summer That Melted Everything and Betty, take place in a small town in southeastern Ohio, Breathitt. I think that's it, right? I always forget whether I'm going to be mispronouncing it or not. It's
No, breath is
right.
right.
Yes. Um, and tell me where you are today. Are you kind of in that southern Ohio area, and what have you been doing since COVID?
Yep, so I am. So I grew up, yeah, in both Southern Ohio and South Central Ohio, and I still live in both places. And yeah, it was Southern Ohio that inspired Breathed. And I don't have the dialect or the accent of my Southern Ohio characters because, growing up, I went to school in South Central, and mom always sort of taught it out of us because everyone always remarked about her accent in Central Ohio, and so she sort of didn't want that for us. But I loved the accent. I love the Southern Ohio landscape, and it's really what inspired me. And it's really has been the setting for, like you said, not just Betty and the Summer That Melted Everything, but the majority of my novels. And yeah, I'm still here, and it's been great because I love nature, I love being outside and gardening, and so for the past few months with this horrible pandemic and I found comfort in kind of being with the plants and gardening, and you hope that there are brighter days ahead, and that people who have lost loved ones, I mean, you grieve with them. It's a horrible news cycle every day to hear about those who's been so affected by this. And it's something that you still think about every day, and you try to sort of hope that things will improve, that things will get better, especially for those who 2020, their lives has just completely changed. The people they've lost, some are sick themselves. And so, you think about that. And for 2020, I mean, that will always be something that I think all of us remember about this year. And for me, I've sort of found comfort in just being outside, being with nature, reading and writing. And I think for writers, it hasn't really affected our workflow that much because we still work inside, and we're still very much by ourselves. So at least that's a good thing. I've gotten to write and read and just spend that time outside with nature and everything. So that's sort of what my life has looked like in the past few months. But yeah, it's certainly a change for everybody. My older sister is an intensive care nurse in the NICU unit, Children's Hospital, and so I have such respect for those, those first responders and those frontline workers, and she's really hero in these days, and everyone like her. And so you just hope for things to get better, and you hope for, the safety of those family members who are on the front lines. And so hoping for better days, but also valuing how fortunate we are to just be in this time and still be alive and still be doing these things that, we're still so fortunate to be able to do.
Yeah. Well, I think there's never been um, a time in our lifetimes where we've needed books more. Literature is definitely something that's helped sustain me over the past few months, your book being among the books. So why don't you, do you want to read a passage or?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, let's dig in.
Let me just turn to the page here.
I'm going to put up, just let everyone see a copy of the book.
Oh yeah, I love the cover they did. It is so it just reminds me of the hill so beautifully, and I was really happy with it because I gave him kind of the colors that I felt really was speaking to me during the novel, and they kind of really captured that beautifully. So I was happy with the cover. Okay. So this passage I'm going to read, it's about a stage that the patriarch in the family, Landon, who is my papa, Landon, and the story is inspired by my mother Betty's life. And Landon, I look at him as someone who was an environmentalist. He really acknowledged and respected the nature around him, and something that he raised his children on was gardening, and it was so important to their upbringing. And in this garden that he had built a wooden stage for his three daughters, and he told them it was a stage that had been built in the time of his mother and grandmother, and it was a stage that respected and honored the women in his family. And so I just want to read a little bit about that, and then we can definitely discuss more of kind of what this stage meant to Landon, why he built it, and sort of what it meant to his girls and as their sisterhood in particular. By a tree stump next to the garden, Dad had built a stage of timber slabs raised on 4 wooden posts. The posts were about 5 feet high and set firmly in the ground. Dad cut steps into the stump, turning it into a ladder. A stage like this one was in my mother's garden, he said, and the garden before hers all the way back to the beginning of time. Women and girls would sit on a stage, and they would sing to keep the crows and insects away from the crop. As the women sang, their voices seeped into the ground, nourishing the roots of the plants and making them stronger. Boys didn't talk and sing on the stage too, Freya asked. No, Dad said. They didn't have the power that the girls and women had. Me and my sisters named the stage a Faraway Place because even though it was in our yard, it seemed to be so far off in the distance, we were bound by no one and nothing. It was our world, and if you would have heard the language we spoke there, it would have sounded like English to your ear, but we would swear it was something incomparable. In our language, we told stories that didn't end, and songs were always of infinite choruses. We became one another until each of us was a storyteller, an actress, a singer-songwriter who measured the things around us until we felt as though we had mapped out the geometry from the life we had to the life we felt certain we were destined for. In many ways, a faraway place was our hopes and desires manifested into 4 corners of wood. I saw this in the way each of my sisters would stand on the edge of the stage, the wind whipping their hair as they stood ever so still. They had never seemed so tall to me before as they each planted their feet at a distance that felt powerful to them. One hand would be bunching the fabric of their skirts, the other placed out in front of them, feeling the wind against their palms. The way they looked out from the stage, it was as though they'd been alive so long, they were already women.
That's really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love A Faraway Place, and it's so, I think, indicative of Landon and his relationship to his heritage, and honoring that, and also the way he respects nature and the matrilineal kind of, I guess, philosophy that the Cherokees have in terms of like raising up the women, and he very much wanted to do that for his daughters. And in particular, the relationship that Landon and Betty have is so very special because in many ways he kind of tutors her, or she's like his special person to listen and to carry on all of these traditions and things. And I wondered, you know, did you hear about this from your mother in terms of things that were passed down from her and the Cherokee traditions, or did you do research to learn more about them?
Yeah, so mom was one of three daughters, and as fate would have it, she had three daughters. So I'm one of three sisters. And the gardening technique that Landon has in the book, he talks about the three sisters, which wasn't exclusive to Cherokee. It was a technique that many different native tribes had adopted. And it works around the three crops that grow best together, which is maize, beans, and squash. They grow so well together because they're a support system for one another, and they really benefit one another. You know, the corn provides the stalks for the beans vines to wrap up. Beans provide the nitrogen to the soil for the crops to grow, and the squash shades out the ground to prevent pests and weeds. And so Landon was telling his daughters this. He was saying to the eldest daughter, Freya, you're corn, and the middle daughter, beans, and Betty, of course, being the youngest, is squash. And he used that story to tell them how powerful they were and how strong they were and supported to one another. You know, Freya, the other two sisters, grew up her stalk. She was their support system. And when mom was raising us in gardens, because she raised us from a very early age, just being in the garden, you know, I remember walking the plants with her and her describing them. And it was very much like Landon. And she would tell me and my sisters about the three sisters story. And she would say to my eldest sister, Dina, you know, your corn, and Jennifer, my middle sister, your beans, and Tiffany, your squash. And so she was really continuing that generational story of support and sisterhood. And I feel so grateful that she raised us such an early age in the garden and with plants. And she really valued that Cherokee ancestry, and she spoke of it, and she made sure that it was instilled in us in a way that it would shape our identities from an early age, but also in a way that we would know who Landon was and know how an important person he was in her life and how supportive he was. And he was really an ally, you know, to her and her sisters in a time. I mean, women still today are facing stereotypes, but especially in that time of the 1930s, in Alka's case and in Betty's case from the 1950s and on, they were really coming face to face with those stereotypes of what a woman should look like, how she should behave. And Landon was really a driving force and a support system for them, saying that you are powerful. And the thing that I love about Landon was that he was also incorporating that Cherokee history, which, you know, the Cherokee society was a matrilineal and matriarchal society. So they really leaned on women as leaders and thinkers. And he really wanted to apply that in his daughters' lives and tell them that what you have to say is important, what you have to think is valued. And so he was really someone who, in a time when girls and women especially were feeling like they weren't powerful enough, like their voices didn't matter, he was a male in their lives who was an ally to that. And he was saying, no, you are important and you do matter. And he built this stage for his daughters in the garden as a way to give them something tangible to hold on to and give them something that they could stand up on and sort of find that inner power. Because I think he also recognized too that in a society where words, of course, matter, he also wanted to give them something that they could physically approach and physically stand on and physically sort of embrace that Cherokee heritage, but also embrace their inner strength.
Yeah. Well, some of my favorite passages in the book are just these stories that Landon tells Betty. One just sticks in my mind when they go out to pick ginseng. Landon's kind of known locally as a healer, and he makes teas and decoctions for the local people for their ailments. And he teaches Betty, you know, how to make these. And when they're digging up the ginseng, and he's teaching her, you know, how you know which ginseng and when it's ready. And then this tradition of placing a bead in the ground when you take something from the ground, and the bead is a gift back to the earth. It's just, it's really, I don't know, it's fulfilling for, I think, our times to know that, in a lot of ways we need to kind of get back to that, kind of understanding and valuing everything that the earth gives us and that nature gives us. And I really like those stories.
Yeah, yeah, I love that he had done that. And I think too, he was just teaching his children just, because he would say that the more that we disrespect nature, it's going to sound off. It's not going to always take it, and we're going to have repercussions for our actions. And so he was really sort of, talking about global warming, but not necessarily using those words, but he was speaking about it in a way that if you don't respect the ecosystem around us and the nature around us, that there are going to be consequences of that. And it was something that mom carried forward to us. It was something that she always said, respect and find that balance between, helping nature and not taking from her, but really looking at this earth as something that we are the caretakers of, and we're not the owners of it, and really understanding that what we do has an effect not just on our life, but the wildlife around us and the nature around us. And he was someone who I love that about. And you speak about him being someone in the community that they sort of went to for these tonics and decoctions. And for my research for the book, I already knew about the Cherokee ancestry, but I wanted to sort of find out what clan it was, because the ancient Cherokee had clans within their society. And so I hired a accredited genealogist, and they looked back and they found that it was the Anawodi clan, and it was the Red Paint clan, and it was known for its medicine, women, and men. And that really made sense, because you see that in Landon. You see that the generations had sort of passed that down to him. He was someone who he grew up with several generations of his family in one household. And the elders in that household, they only spoke Cherokee. And Landon was really of a generation that he had to speak not only Cherokee, but he also had to learn the language of the white man, because that's the society he was entering. And so how his elders spoke to him was really through story, and really through that culture and that tradition, because that was their universal language. And I think when Landon then became a father, the way he then spoke about that heritage to his children was also through story. So that was sort of the language that carried through, with storytelling on that side of the family. And that's what I love about Indigenous storytelling, because it's so much more than just once upon a time and an ending. It's a way that they really understand their origin. It's a way that they describe that origin. It's a way that they describe their relationship with the environment around them. And Landon really uses that story much the same way. But yeah, I do look at him, especially that ginseng story, and as someone who was an environmentalist, and really trying to teach that to his children. At that moment, he's telling Betty, when you take something, you give something back. And I think it's a lesson that he was hoping she would apply, not just to nature in her life, but to her interactions with people and communities. So he was really just also teaching respect and kindness, not just for nature, but also for each other, which especially for these two who were living in predominantly white communities, that they were not receiving that sort of same kindness and respect back. So he was someone who was a teacher on so many different levels, and someone that that just always stands out to me, because I had done Q&A sessions with family members, because Landon had died over a decade before I was born. So I really had to shape his character out of those sessions with his children and with his wife, Alka. And, I really wanted to preserve from those sessions how much they loved him, and how much he had meant to them, and sort of the support he had shown them. And so I hope that I've preserved that on the page. But yeah, that's something that I've always just loved and connected to with Landon the most.
Well, there's a dark side, I guess, to the bond that Landon and Betty have, because it's forged in trying to comprehend and in some ways defend themselves against the horrible racism that they encounter as dark-skinned people. And there's parts of that that are extremely painful to read. And I wanted to talk to you about, I don't know how much of the book is based on, actual fact, or some of it is fictionalized in the account of your mother Betty's life. But maybe you can talk to kind of the echoes of that kind of discrimination that you felt in your family, and how that you've projected that onto the page.
Yeah, so I am very fair skinned, and my mother is brown skinned, and Papa had brown skin. And I remember when I was growing up, because I do have such a difference with my mother, my fellow peers would ask me, I didn't know you were adopted, Tiffany. And I'm like, I'm not adopted. And I'm like, that's my real mother. And so it was always a surprise to them, because there was a difference in the way we looked. And I, of course, have not experienced racism. And so hearing Mom talk about those experiences and those sessions I did with her, and the bullying she experienced, not just from her peers, but from her teachers as well, because you really hope that those teachers in that time would be a support system for her. But it ends up that in that time and place, they were harboring their own sort of racist ideas within the classroom. And so she was really punished just for having brown skin in a time when communities were predominantly white. And so, I remembered back to a story. It wasn't in the book, but I remember she had told me about career day at school. And, the students had to go to the gym to, talk about what their futures, and the teacher said, oh, Betty, you stay behind, you're not going to do anything with your life anyways. And so there was this idea that Landon and Betty were not important, were not valued. And I listened to the stories she told about Papa being beaten up by white men just because he was brown skinned and he was in their territory. And Landon we see as someone who's really trying to feel significant. In the book, he talks about feeling as if he's the paint drop on the portrait of a greater man. And it's really him trying to leave a mark in the world, because from such an early age, he had been called boy or different racial slurs, and he was never had that same respect as those who were coming of age around him. And at the beginning of the story, we hear Betty say that his voice soared over the hills around us. And to her and his children, he was already someone who was so important and significant. And it took him a while to sort of recognize the impact he had on his children's lives, and that through being a good father, he had achieved that significance. But yeah, those moments of racism, and hearing Mom talk about it, and listening to the racial slurs that she was called, it was so difficult, because here I am, her daughter, and I haven't had those same experiences, and I'm hearing that she had experienced these things, and it's so incredibly difficult to hear and to know. And of course, her perspective is going to carry so much more weight, and she's going to feel those emotions so much more than I ever could, having not experienced them directly. But I really wanted to uplift hers and Landon's story, not insert myself in that narrative, not say that these are my own experiences, or kind of I know what this feels like, because I don't. And I really wanted to just show that how just their presence in these communities was this immediate reaction by those who lived there. And you would hope that things have improved, but then we come to 2020, and it's still very much such a difficult time for people of color to try to get their voices heard, and they're still really suffering. And even though we haven't been seeing that every day, to hear from their perspective that this is still a daily grind for them, that's something that they experience daily. And it's something that Mom and Papa's story, I explored it too with Sal's character in The Summer That Melted Everything. And in his case, I was really focused, because I had written that novel the summer of Eric's killing. And, we heard his his words, "I can't breathe," and we saw that the offending officer wasn't indicted, and I was really writing into Sal's character those feelings of injustice within the court system, but he also represented mom in many ways because he was a storyteller, and I really wanted to infuse him with those aspects. And I also saw my papa on him as well. So I think these two characters, mom and papa, I'll always be carrying their story with me in some way and exploring it in some way. And in this case, in Betty, it's really showing that relationship between a father and a daughter as they try to live in these communities and sort of find their place in a world that is telling them there isn't a place for them. So I love that Landon really used the Cherokee history to say to Betty, this is not something we should be ashamed of. This is something we should embrace and really love about ourselves, and hope that the people around us can sort of see how great this is too. So I'm glad that he didn't, just tell her, turn away from this culture, just try to fit in, cut your hair, do all these different things. He was really telling her, you're beautiful the way you are. You don't have to look like the girls in the magazines. You're powerful the way you are, and you should be who you are, and be so grateful for it. So I think that having a father like that and having experienced that racism was such a saving grace for her.
Yeah, I mean, it's really extraordinary how cruel the adults were to to a child, adults in the neighborhood, the school teachers, like you suggested. And it's also with that ugliness, though, there's just such incredible beauty in everything that Landon tries to do to make Betty proud of who she is, and her dark skin, and to make her feel that she's got a legacy of kind of proud, brave, capable people, behind her. And that he almost instills in her, in some way, some kind of like superpower, through the legacy of the ancestors, to kind of try to help her overcome all of this bigotry and racism that's all around them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think back, when you say that about the superhero power, I think back to that moment where, he takes her hand and he starts running through the fields with her, and he's sort of,
Yes.
he's saying to her, "Can you feel it? Can you feel the ancestors yet?" And she's running, and she feels it, and he finally lets her go, because. And she runs ahead because she was always the one who was going to save herself and be her own superhero. And I think back to what Freya was saying in the book too, when Leland mentions he has saved her life that one time, and she says, they never understand we can save ourselves. And I really wanted to represent that. I remember, because I had queried agents for this book for nearly 2 decades. And I remember one of the agents saying that we need to see the women in romantic relationships as if through that fulfillment of romance that they would somehow be saved, or they would somehow be healed. And I really wanted to preserve the women being able to save themselves. And when they needed someone to lean on, they really leaned on one another and their sisterhood. And even Alka, who was someone who was a complicated mother, but she still was sort of coming from a history and a past that has shaped her. And I didn't feel like romance or passion was going to save these women or sort of heal the things that they were going through. It was really going to be something that was internally, and it was really going to be the relationships to one another and with each other. So it was something that I really wanted to preserve. And Landon was someone who said to them, this is your superpower, just being you. And it wasn't just with the girls he did that with, with Trustin and Lint. And Lint was inspired by my uncle, who dealt with mental illness his whole life, and he had ultimately died of an overdose. But what I remembered from my sessions with him was how important Landon had been to his life. He said at nights were really difficult for him as a child, especially. And he said Landon would sit up all night with him. It didn't matter that he didn't get sleep that night. He would go into his son's room, and he would just sit there, and he would talk to him, and he would tell him stories, and he would talk him down from sort of those anxieties and those sort of nervous feelings that he was feeling. And, he eventually found that coffee also helped. So he said it was always nights with my dad and coffee and me. And it was really such a support system for him. And so Landon was telling all of his children, you're superheroes in your own way, and you can save yourself, and this can be your life. And so he was such a supportive figure for them, and he really instilled that in them, that they could be their own heroes.
Well, I guess I didn't draw this conclusion on my own, but now that you say it, there is um, a, s- a surprising lack of romance in this book. And I think that's probably why I love it so much, because, there isn't, there, one of the things I do love about the book, although it's a little bit romantic, but in some ways it's also very practical, is the way that Landon and Alka meet in the cemetery. That's a fantastic scene. And, it's very early in the book, so I'm not giving anything away, but he meets her in a cemetery and she's eating an apple there, and he's thinking, well, this is kind of strange, a lady just kind of having a picnic in the middle of the cemetery, and Landon is working in the cemetery, and that's how they meet. But no, that is so refreshing that I'm happy and proud of you for resisting resisting that call to make some kind of male knight in shining armor come in and
Right.
have a romantic relationship with the characters. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, and I do. I look at Landon as Alka as that kind of being the love story of the book, because even though they had their moments and it's complicated, I think the best thing Alka did was that she, and people always say she is a complicated mother, and yes, that's true. But I think what sets her apart from her own mother was that she really created a safe environment for her children just by looking at Landon and seeing that he was so different from her father, and that he could be a father to her children. And so in that, she was really, really such a loving mother to her children. And I see that love story, which we talk about when we say love story. We think the stereotypical love story between a boy and a girl, but there's a love story between the sisters, and there's a love story between the daughter and her father, and Landon. I'm talking about Betty and Landon, and Alka and Landon. So we have those love stories in there, but it's not anything that it's not a romantic sort of plea for save me, my knight in shining armor. It's more like this is the bonds of their relationship. And I think I think that fulfilled much more than a romantic sort of rendezvous could have.
Well, there is now that we're talking about it, though, just a wonderful, lovely moment with the lemons. Do you want to describe the lemons that between Landon and Alka? That's a lovely scene.
Yeah, yeah. So Alka has sort of a moment in her life where she's really struggling, and he takes the family on a picnic in the woods, and he lets them have their meal, and then afterwards he said, "We'll go for a walk." And so he walks them through the woods, the trees of this woods, and he says, "Look up." And when his wife and children look up, they see lemons tied up in the trees, and it's such a beautiful moment, because it was something that he had done, and they weren't aware of. And you see this sort of you can imagine the expression, especially on Alka's face, having seen this act that he had done, because when they were younger, she had told him, I would love to one day have a lemon grove all my own, and to live in this sort of yellow world, because for her, yellow sort of signified happiness and sort of an escape. And so he had, in his own way, he couldn't buy her a lemon grove of trees, and where she could live happily on that. So he gave her his version of a lemon grove, which was the woods of their home. And he had taken these lemons and he had tied them up there. And I think that it was such a meaningful moment, and really sort of showed his love better than him just saying, "I love you, everything's going to be all right." His love was really shown in his acts. And I think we see that too with him and Betty. We never hear them say in the book, "I love you," directly. And at the end of the novel, he asked her, did I ever tell you that I loved you? She says, you told me every time you told me a story, Dad. And she asked him, did I ever tell you that I loved you? And he said, you told me every time you listened to one. And so they say they love each other in these little ways. And that lemon grove and his gift to Alco is really him saying, I see you. I recognize the pain you're going through. I love you. And there is brighter days ahead.
Well, the one extraordinary thing about this book, I think, are all of the stories that are kind of, it's almost like a jewel box. Like you've got the narrative, which is the box, and you open it up, but there's all these jewels inside. I think when I was describing the book, I called it kind of like, it's like Betty's like a Shahrazad here. She's like weaving out and allowing us to share all of these stories that her father told her and that she learned as she was growing up. I want to mention one of my favorites, which I think is also so lovely, the story of Old Cotton and his red balloons. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so Cotton is a character in the town, and his wife, he had been married to a woman who was a Black woman, and he's a white man. And so their relationship was complicated in these white societies and these white communities from the beginning, and especially they would have been together in what would have been the 1920s. And so when we meet Cotton in the 1950s and in the 1960s, he's an older man now, but he's still holding on to his wife who, and I don't think I'm giving any spoilers away, but she had been attacked, beaten, and killed in the community just because of her skin color. And so he has never forgotten that, and his love for her has lived on through the decades. And one of the things that he does around town is he writes his dead wife these letters as if she had never died and as if they were still having this life together. And he tells her everything they've done for the day, and he takes these letters and he folds them up and he puts them inside a balloon that he fills with helium, and then he lets that balloon go because in his mind he's sending that letter to his wife in heaven. And so we see, the effects of races, not just with the Carpenter family, but with these little pockets in the community. And we also see those sort of subtle hints with it too. And I remember back now, I'm thinking about that newspaper article where the shootings are taking place in town, and they interview one of the people in the town, and they say, I never trust anyone whose face blends into the night. And I think we have those subtle foreshadowings of racism, and we certainly see that with Cotton's life that this has been something that has been an issue here in this town for decades, and the Carpenters are sort of entering this fray. But I think what Cotton's story also says is one of love, that just because this hate comes in and this violence comes in, it doesn't mean that it can kill the love. And so for Cotton, he really has survived that, and at least sort of shown that sort of hate-filled group that took his wife away, that you could take her away, but you couldn't take away my love for her. And that was such a powerful moment with Cotton and sort of his presence in the book.
I'm glad that you brought up the newspaper articles. So just to explain to the listeners out there, the chapters are kind of broken with this beginning of each with a short paper from the local newspaper that reports on gunshots that are heard around town, and they're kind of mysterious and no one knows why or who or what's going on. And I wondered what made you, in kind of putting the novel together, was that kind of an intentional thing, or did it just kind of come to you organically as a good way to kind of create breaks in the narrative?
Yeah, it came up sort of, it evolved naturally on its own. I saw them in this town, and it just felt like their presence was really setting off these sort of loud sounds within the community. And that's when it sort of, well, what if there is this sound that sort of echoes their presence in the community? And so that's sort of where the articles came in. And also, I trying to think about how I can explain without giving the spoiler away, but it also connects to an internal story within the family. And we see that with the family member, they connect to these gunfire and these shootings. And I'm thinking about that article at the very end where the person says, I hope that whoever had been shooting this whole time finally got out what they were trying to say. So I look at the gunfire as another story within the story. It's this thing that's being told, and maybe it's not being told with words, but it's being told with a sound that is understandable to the person who's firing the gun, and it's understandable at the end to some in the community. And so it really became a way to step outside of the family, sort of get reactions from the community and from the townspeople, but also being pulled back into the family, because the family members, they were all suspected of the gunfire just simply because of the color of their skin. And I'm thinking back to the article I'd referenced where he said, anyone whose face blends into the night. And so they were immediately thought of as being the suspects for this firing, because right when they arrive in town, that's when the gunfire starts. And so we see Betty, who she's coming of age in this community in which there is these pockets of gunfire echoing around her. And in many ways, it sort of echoes those ripples that are happening within the family. It's echoing those ripples that are happening within the community. And so I really found that the articles and the gunfire was really this something running parallel to her as she was carving her path forward. And it felt like a natural evolution. And then once we got to the end of the book, it felt like a natural evolution, that the gunfire would then sort of come to its conclusion, and without giving too much away, sort of come to the conclusion of the novel with it. And so it just felt like it was a partner in this telling of the story, and something that sort of supported that internal dialogue and that sort of internal workings of the family, but also the community.
Well, it is interesting. You note that last kind of newspaper article, and throughout, the community is seeing these gunshots as menacing. They're afraid. The sheriff is ready to find the perpetrator, and the community is kind of freaked out about him. But then the woman that they interview at the end is kind of like, I kind of missed the gunshots. I kind of grew used to the gunshots. It was a good way to kind of wrap up that part of it. I wanted to ask you, throughout the book, as Betty's growing, because this really is a story of her coming of age and growing up, she likes to write stories, and she starts out writing stories about Martians and things that a kid would write about. But we learn towards the end of the book that she's really been writing more. She's really been kind of making an account of some of the dark elements that are happening, and things that are happening in the family. And I'm wondering, was your mom, did she write growing up, and did she have notebooks or anything that you were able to take or use in writing the book?
Yeah, so I want to say the poem that's at the beginning of the book, "My Broken Home," that is actually a poem that Mom wrote about her family. And yeah, so she's always written poetry, and I have notebooks of that. And this was a family of artists. Freya was a singer-songwriter, Trustin was an artist, and Mom wrote, and Landon was a storyteller. And for her, she used story as that compass forward. And, we talk about the beginning of the book where she was writing those stories that kids would write about Martians. And then as she grows up, she really uses her pen as a tool to survive the things that she's learning, and to survive those secrets that she's discovering about her family. And she takes these stories and she buries them into the earth. And, I was asked, is Betty older in the book as she's telling the story? Who is she telling it to? And in my mind, Betty is a mature woman as she's telling this story. She's someone who is living with the blessings and the chaos of the past. She still has the child inside her, but she's definitely a woman aged by that wisdom and by those experiences. And I look at her as someone who's sitting there telling this story, the typewriter. You know, she's in the book, Landon gives her that typewriter, and I still had the typewriter that he had given her just before he died. And it's like an artifact of that time and place. And so I imagine this story as being Betty. She's the last of her family, and she's telling this story that she had lived, and she's there at the typewriter, and she's feeling those ripples at her fingertips. And so, yeah, mom was someone who wrote and something that, you know, she always valued creative expression, and she always valued reading. From the time that we were in the crib, she was reading to us. And you know, we always had books around us, even if we just went to the grocery store. You know, she would give us a book to walk beside her with the shopping cart. And so books were so valued, and writing was so valued. And I was just so honored to be able to take one of her poems, have it start the book out. Because I think in that brief poem, My Broken Home, she's talking about, you know, you give me a wall and I'll give you a hole. And she's really tearing down those walls, and she's saying, this is what's behind them. And she's saying, you know, you give me water and I'll give you blood. And she's saying, this is the family I had, and this is the bonds that we had, and the ripples even in blood is just as everlasting as water. And so I thought it was just such a perfect summary to the book. But yeah, this was definitely a family of artists, and mom was just so inspiring with that artistry, and I just feel so grateful that I was raised by her.
Well, I want to recommend to folks to go to your website, because you've got some wonderful photos of Betty through the ages, and of Landon and the family. And I also found on the website some paintings that you've done that were kind of inspired by the book. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so yeah, on the website there's some photos, and I also want to mention that I found, you know, as I was writing this book, I found the newspaper article from the Arkansas Gazette, and it would have been in 1954, so it would have been a few months after mom was born. And Landon, if you remember in the book, he was a moonshiner, and you know, that thing he did in Texas where he buried the shine in the ground and he covered it with rocks, it was something that he actually did. And in Arkansas, he wasn't so fortunate to escape the law, and he was actually arrested for moonshining. They found a homemade still in his house, and that newspaper article is there talking about his arrest. And you know, I imagine it because mom would have still been probably 4 months old at the time of that arrest. And so that was something really interesting. And for the art, I really I wanted to use both paint but also charcoal, which Trustin uses in the book. And so there's some charcoal drawings up there of the family members, and also some paintings. I did mom, I did Landon, and I did one of Lent, you know, kind of discussing that sort of struggles that he was going through. And I did a couple paintings of kind of how I imagine those Cherokee ancestors would look. And so I love to have that visual pairing with the books. I've done that since I was a kid. It just adds a layer to me where I can sort of stare into their eyes. And so, and this book was really special to me because I was sort of making images of those people who were close to me. So it was just such a great journey to sort of bring that to the page with the pen, but then also bring it to the page with the brush. So it was really great.
I really love the painting of Lent. I think that's where his head's coming out of the deer head. Wonderful. Everyone needs to go on. It's TiffanyMcDaniel.com. So get on the website and look at the art, look at the photos, and that newspaper article is really cool. And read the book. What an inspiring book for us in these times, Tiffany. You've really gifted us here with something that, with all of this unstructured time that so many of us have right now, that we can look into the lives of this family and really appreciate the love of nature that they had, the respect for nature that they had, and also see echoes of a lot of the ugliness in humanity that we're seeing today. So congratulations on the book. I know it's a hard time to be bringing a book out into the world right now, but we're going to do what we can to honor this one, okay?
Oh, God. Well, thank you. I feel completely undeserving of that, but thank you. Thank you so much for the support. And I can't thank you enough for being a champion for this book. And yeah, I mean, I hope readers enjoy it. And I know that Mom is excited. And I also want to say about my website, I don't have social media, but readers can always feel free to connect. I don't want to feel like I'm standoffish without having social media, but I do answer every email I receive personally, so they can always, feel free to reach out to me and let me know if they like Betty. And I just hope that they feel inspired by her as much as I've been inspired by Mom. And I can't thank you enough for the support you're showing it. And Mom thanks you as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Oh, thank you.